introductions. I don't think we've got any new members here on the committee except for Representative Croft, who's not here right now. We are sad to see Representative Howerton go, but she's off to bigger and better things, I guess. So in the tax committee, they reorganized, and she's in the tax committee now, so she can't be two places at once. I'm very disappointed in her. Yeah. All right, but what I do want to do, because we've got some new faces in the staff, I do want to give all the folks here in the center table the opportunity to introduce themselves, new or old. Not old, but returning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Elena Rutter with Legislative Research. This is my 4th session on this committee.
I am Jillian Block, also with Legislative Research.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Dew. I'm Representative Proctor's new committee assistant, so please bear with me while I learn this procedure.
Is this your official 3rd day on the job?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So yes, just please be patient with us while we figure out the systems. We had one person doing it for a really long time.
I'm Noah with the audiovisual team.
Jill Shelley, Legislative Research.
Mike Heim with the Reviser of Statutes Office.
Okay, and we have one other reviser, Jason Long, who's not here today, but normally he will be here with us whenever he can. So I'm going to turn the mic back over to Reviser Heim here very quickly to let you know about an important rules change this year in the House that is going to affect the next thing that we're doing on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, what this is a new procedure for introduction of bills, and each bill will actually have printed on the face of the bill, the front page of the bill, the person that asked for the bill to be introduced. So even if it's a committee bill, it's going to have somebody's name underneath, and it can be, if it's asked by a state agency, it will be the House Elections Committee as requested by the Governmental Ethics Commission, for example. Or if it's the House Elections Committee requested by, and just pick a name, a lobbyist, and so on. So if we will try and keep straight who asked for these bills, the idea is not to make a mistake about who requested them, because if we do, it could upset the person whose name is on the bill that doesn't want to be on the bill. So anyway, we'll do our best. If you got questions, I'll answer them.
Any questions for Reviser Heim? Yes, Representative Hoagland.
Thank you, Chair. Will it also show where the person providing the bill comes from, like their state of origin?
It's really up to who. We're not going to try and track down the origin unless it's publicly explained in the hearing or when it's introduced. So if you are introducing a bill on behalf of a lobbyist, it's up to you whether or not you disclose the lobbyist. Otherwise, we won't know. I mean, and there's no way for us to track down who's the ultimate requester of the bill.
Okay, great question. Are there any other questions for Reviser Heim? Okay, so with that rules change in mind, I'd like to open the floor for bill introductions. Are there any bill introductions? Okay, Mr. Vice Chairman, you're on.
Yes, we have a bit of a list of bills for elections. First is RS 2521 on remote ballot boxes, on the Secretary of State to adopt rules with county election officer input. We have RS 2524 on the use of cryptocurrency and campaign finance being prohibited. Political funds can be used for a federal office. We do have one at the request of Representative Les Mason, RS 2544, that is independent candidates for statewide office, new regulations on petition requirements, raising them, and the payment of a filing fee not allowed. Another one, RS 2551, on the crime of corrupt political advertising and campaign finance law, amended to cover constitutional amendments, bond issues, and other questions submitted to a vote. We have, if you guys are tracking all these okay, we have an RS 2555 on corrupt political advertising, on attributions, and on the treasurer names not required. And I have a few more here. We have an RS 2229, which requires physical ballots for audits. We have RS 2230, which is an end of in-person early voting, ended on the Sunday before the election day. On RS 2231 is allowing a political party attribution of a candidate on a nonpartisan race ballot. On RS 2234, which requires an ID when returning an advance ballot for another voter. And we have RS 2235, which is on drop box ballots are provisional until verified. Two more, RS 2527 on poll worker qualifications for military and college students. And then there is an RS 2528, which is striking the 3-day mail-in ballot provision post-election period, providing a 2-day extension on the front end of the time period. And that is all that I have.
Okay, so we've heard the bill introductions. Is there any questions?
Yes, sir. For clarification, I heard the source of the first three, but I think 55, 51 down through the end, were they all committee introductions, or where are they from? Okay, thank you.
Last one was 2528. Yes.
Okay, and before I call for objections, I'm going to object to one because I didn't mean for it to be on this list. Somebody wants to come in and introduce it themselves, so I'm going to object to our 2527 just so we can strike it from the minutes. It's not introduced. Yeah, the poll worker qualifications. Somebody wants to come in and introduce that.
That's okay.
That having been said, are there any objections to any of these other bills being introduced? Committee bills? Okay, seeing none, they're introduced. Our next order, before I do that, are there any other bill introductions? Or is everybody clear in the chat for one day? Okay, seeing no bill introductions, we'll move on to our next order of business, which is a review.
All right, hi, good afternoon. My name is Leanne Thone. I'm a research analyst with KLRD, and I'm going to go over briefly the Special Committee on Elections report to the 2024 Kansas Legislature. This interim committee was directed to study a few different things, including continuing to evaluate the limit on the number of advance voting ballots delivered on behalf of other voters, remote ballot drop boxes, and the deadline for returning advance voting ballots, reviewing laws, rules and regs, and procedures regarding voter roll maintenance, reviewing the process to replace a U.S. Senator in the case of a vacancy, and discussing restoring voter confidence. So a lot of the bill introductions you just heard may sound familiar in this report because we talked about a lot of those things. We met for 2 days, September 28th and 29th. On the September 28th meeting, KLRD and the revisers provided some overviews. First of election laws enacted since 2017. We went back to that year because that was the year that the 3-day grace period was passed. And the revisers provided us some insight on which election laws are currently going through litigation. That includes 3 provisions from 2021 HB 2183, including false representation of an election official, signature verification on advanced voting ballots, and the limit of 10 advanced voting ballots an individual can deliver on behalf of another person. Those are still in force and pending review on appeal by the Kansas Supreme Court. And then 2 provisions in 2021 HB 2332, and that includes the third parties sending advanced voting ballots to Kansas voters with personalized information. That provision has been permanently enjoined, and then prohibiting third parties located outside of Kansas from sending any such applications to Kansas voters. This has also been permanently enjoined, but the state is appealing to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals on that, which is still pending. Then we had 2 visiting fellows from Opportunity Solutions Project visit with us about a 2019 Memorandum of Understanding between Governor Kelly and Loudlight, Demos, the ACLU, and the ACLU of Kansas, intended to settle concerns regarding alleged violations by the state of the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. They discussed with us a connection between this memorandum of understanding and an executive order signed by President Biden in March of 2021. They felt that there was the appearance of federal resources being used to engage in targeted voter registration efforts designed to benefit left-wing candidates. And they proposed to address this, requiring legislative approval for new federal funding and guidance, passing legislation declaring null and void any NVRA designations made to or National Voter Registration Agency designations under the NVRA made by anyone other than the legislature, and using legislative oversight power in coordination with the Attorney General to investigate and prosecute any wrongdoing. We also had a presentation of the second part of the LPA audit of Kansas's procedures for election security. This had the question, do county election offices have adequate policies and practices to ensure the accuracy and security of voting machines, ballots, storage units, and devices used to tabulate votes during elections? They found in that report that counties generally had adequate practices for election process security, generally had adequate election management, so computer security practices. Ballot security practices were weaker overall than other security measures. Most counties reviewed had inadequate voting and tabulation machine security practices except for physical security practices, and counties had some transfer and movement security practices that were adequate, but others that were not adequate. They stated that larger counties generally have stronger security than smaller counties, likely because they have greater security needs, but they also have greater resources. And if you look at that report from the LPA, they also include responses from the Secretary of State's office on the findings that they found. Then we had a visit from the Secretary of State's office, the General Counsel, and the Director of Elections, provided us with a lot of information about the strengths that they feel that Kansas has in election integrity and security. They also spoke with us about usability of voting machines, what happens when issues arise, how are those reported, and how are those handled, issues from the 2022 primary election, the implementation of watermarked ballots as passed in 2022 Senate sub for HB 2138, the designation of election equipment as critical infrastructure, which has been done by the last 3 presidential administrations, and efforts to continue training election officials in best practices. They also provided an update on implementation of enacted 2023 bills and 2022 bills. Going to the September 29th meeting, we started with an overview of deadlines for advanced mail ballots in different states. And then former Representative Keith Esau came and spoke about the implementation of the 3-day grace period. And he said that one of the reasons why he believes that we should return to that Election Day deadline is because not all mail is routinely postmarked. Some postmarks are unreadable, and it can be difficult to tell whether a ballot was mailed before the close of the polls on Election Day. We also had 5 representatives from Liberty Lions League to provide testimony on different issues related to election security and integrity. Those included potential issues and vulnerabilities with election machines, discussion of audits, how those work, and when Kansas implements those, now that we've had a few bills that have changed that process over the last several years. Election machine ecosystem, including voter registration databases, voter validation systems, tabulation systems, and reporting systems. They spoke a lot about the importance of a decentralized system so that control of elections can stay local and in the hands of local citizens. They also discussed different election integrity measures, remote ballot drop boxes, and different issues of ballot security. That is a very brief discussion of everything that they spoke about. So if you're interested in knowing more about that, I would highly suggest looking at the minutes or watching the YouTube feed from that day. So the list of conclusions and recommendations, the committee did not make formal recommendations, but there was a lot of thoughtful discussion about considerations that should be made in the future, including evaluating statutory election audit requirements and considering expanding those audits to evaluate more races in each election, considering making Election Day a state holiday, soliciting testimony from voting machine vendors, considering legislation requiring recount procedures and audits to be completed with paper ballots, the benefits and drawbacks of restricting the use of advanced voting ballots, signature verification methods used for advanced voting ballots, how other states evaluate their election security if they use ethical hacking or other testing methods, considering creating a citizen oversight board that would oversee, track, and follow up on voter fraud reports, providing for more consistent oversight of election procedures at the county level, requesting a closed session meeting for legislators to learn more about election security procedures, requesting more information regarding the difference in powers and duties between the county election officers and the secretary's office, directing counties to ensure their election policies and procedures are documented in writing, and continuing to study issues with voting machines and any strategies for combating bad actors. So that was a lot of information, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
And committee, before we go to questions, I was remiss in mentioning that this report and the other report we're going to cover today in draft form for the ethics report, because it's not finalized yet, was emailed out today. So I apologize that it took so long to get it out, but you have the hard copy of this if you want to examine it in more detail or ask specific questions about the text. The other thing I'll say, on the issue of the, I think was it the two fellows who came, what was the organization they were from?
Opportunity Solutions
Opportunity
Project.
Solutions. Myself and Senator Thompson sent a core request to the governor's office to see, per the discussion that day, to see if there were any other agreements, and they did a thorough review and found no other similar agreements or anything like that that those two gentlemen talked about. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor. The idea here is if you have questions, or if you watched the committee hearing or participated in the committee hearing, if you had additional insights or things that you think we might ought to consider from the committee, this is meant to be a discussion, not a briefing. So with that, I'll open the floor to any comments or questions. Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I probably should have done a better job when you sent the minutes out, Leanne. I apologize for that. My impression was that we spent a great deal of time on the security or the hackability, vulnerability of the electronic systems. So my impression also was that we should have had a little bit stronger language on how we're going to actually put the fire out, because it just keeps coming back. You know, the suggestion is that, well, you know, you've got this vulnerability, that vulnerability, you show a quick screenshot, and then off you go. So the accusation's made, and there's no way to kind of settle it finally. So I would like to see personally a little stronger language on kind of how we settle this and make sure that the people have confidence in their election system. Because every time it is brought up that there's something wrong with the electronics, then everybody starts worrying. So to the extent that we can do this test, I mean, there's a suggestion that we look at other states, which is fine, but I think it needs to be more action-oriented. That is, we need to do one. So that'd be my suggestion. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
So I was going to save this for the end, but you teed it up so well for me, Representative. I feel like I got to say it. So the next week, we have invited two groups of people that I felt did not get the opportunity to kind of share their side of the story. On Tuesday, we're going to have, we've invited election officers from across the state to come in and provide their impressions on the hearing, but also just talk about some of those issues. And then we've also, I don't know if it's going to happen because it's pretty short notice, but we've invited vendors for voting machines here in Kansas to come testify on Thursday to talk about those things. The other thing, since we're on the topic, on Wednesday of next week, the vendors are going to be here, and they're going to set up all their machines. They're going to be down in the basement next to the entrance, the visitor's entrance, with all their machines set up from 10 to 2 on Wednesday. And I encourage everybody in the committee, if you, I know Wednesday's a busy day because it's a short week, but if you can get down there at all to ask them questions, to talk to them. And I encourage anybody watching this at home or anybody, any of the other legislators in the body, I encourage everybody to go down there and have a conversation, because I agree. There was a lot of things said in that meeting, and nobody got the chance to, you know, to rebut or to give the other side of the coin. Any other questions or comments for Ms. Stone or for, Mr. Vice Chairman?
Kind of following up on that, I will say one of the things that I think we have learned from the last special committee is just how much or how important it is as far as the auditing procedure, because even if you had any hypothetical flaws in your machinery, I mean, audits, as far as, you know, a post-election audit is an incredibly powerful way of keeping, you know, bad actors at bay, because obviously somebody to be doing something on a bigger scale, you know, their irregularities would show up in an audit when you're comparing what the machines say to what the actual ballots say. And I don't think, I mean, we have a pretty vigorous program. I think one of the bills, I think perhaps even extends that somewhat. But also just, I really appreciate the chairman, you know, one of your other, in a competitive environment, I mean, you know, voting machine sales reps, you know, if you can torch your competition's thing that's saying this thing is a bunch of crap because it has these security flaws, you know, and ours, we've fixed all this stuff to make it totally flawless, you know, given the fact that I think anybody with any sensibility will see that election integrity is basically a nonpartisan issue, in that the Democrats have as much to lose from it as the Republicans. You know, if you have if you have security flaws in your voter machine that are somehow exploitable, I mean, you don't know if it's going to be, George Soros exploiting it, or some Russian hacker, or the Chinese, or any other sort of ideological persuasion. That you have to realize that, hacking is a fairly non-denominational profession, and that I would think anybody trying to sell machines, that they would actually have a very good critique of their competitors' machines, as far as good or bad or otherwise. And I'm glad to have some of those folks coming next week.
Representative Howell.
Thank you. I did not serve on this particular committee, but I did listen to it online. And I think, of course, all of us should take seriously the security and accuracy of our elections, but I also think that we should be careful to be very discerning as we listen to people testify that are even obviously intelligent people, some of them, and have some expertise in some areas, but some of the things that I noticed that they said were could not be accurate and were not consistent. One of the things that I recall noticing during that committee hearing was at one point, one of the experts testifying, responding back to the chair about, how could it be hacked when we physically draw out of a hat which precincts are going to be audited, okay? And that expert responded by saying that, well, obviously they would target the really tiny precincts that we don't audit because they're so small. But yet, by the same token, now granted, it was another expert, but another expert in response to, I think it was the vice chair's question about the fact that our hand count ballots, recounts, identically match. Our paper ballot counts and our machine counts identically match every time with our recounts. And their response to that was that they obviously, those precincts must not have been important enough to hack that particular race, okay? So those are extremely inconsistent. And I think one of the beauties that we cannot underestimate in our system here in Kansas is the combination that we use of our machines and our physical checks and step processes that cannot be hacked because they're physical. And so having the combination of those, I think, is genius, and it is vitally important and really contributes to our security.
Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, like Representative Howell, I was not on the committee, but I did watch it. Actually, I went back and watched it several times, different parts of it. And I just think it was very one-sided as far as the testimony goes. And that kind of concerns me. But I know I've had assurances that we're going to hear more from the other side in this committee, which I'm looking forward to. And we've heard from them before, but, it's, always good to hear from them again. And I think it's, some people I think it's somewhat human nature. If you're voting in an election and you want a certain outcome and you're kind of expecting that outcome, then if it doesn't come out that way, your first, must have been a mistake or someone must have cheated. But then, like usually in a day or two, you think about it and think, well, no, maybe I just didn't have that one right. But anyway, I just think, at least here in Kansas, I don't know about any other state, but I think we have a pretty good system here. And the people, the county people, they're doing their best. And I don't think there's any widespread hacking or anything going on.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? So I think one thing that did come out of the committee that I thought was very positive is we highlighted the fact that that independent check isn't being done uniformly. A lot of counties are still using, or not a lot of counties, but several counties, including some very large ones, are using ballot images rather than the physical ballot. And that's one of the bills that's introduced today that we'll hear testimony on, and the committee will decide if it's something that they want to adopt. But I think to the extent that there was any consensus in that committee, I think that there was a consensus that we needed to take a look at using the physical ballots rather than the images, just to make it a completely independent check. The other thing that we heard a lot in the committee was we need to go to paper ballots, and I just wanted to climb on top of the Capitol and scream from the dome. We do use paper ballots. Every vote, whether it's cast with an ink pen or with a vote marking machine, produces a paper ballot that the voter has to carry to the count machine to count. Now, a lot of people who say that say, well, we should hand count. We should be hand counting. We shouldn't be using machines to count. And so if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'd like to tell you about something that happened in the off season. We had a race that was decided by one vote in Lansing, Kansas, in Leavenworth County. It was a city council race, 500 votes cast, one vote determined the outcome. And of course, the guy who didn't get that one vote asked for a recount because it was a small number and it wasn't very expensive. And I went and I watched that recount. And the physical count, they had people from both sides of the aisle counting. When they counted the ballots, they counted them twice and got two different numbers. And then when they counted them, the final time, they got the exact same result that the machines had found. And that jumped out at me for all these people to say we should be hand counting ballots. The machine is better at counting the ballots than the people are. It is less error prone than the people. Yes, we need that secondary check to make sure that the paper ballots in those audited precincts reflect what the machine came up with, because we also heard about Cherokee County where they had improperly done the test and had flipped a race, and they found that because of the paper ballot audit. And so, but these folks that are saying that we need to go to all hand counts, it's just not practical, and at the end of the day, it's less accurate. That was my takeaway from the committee. But with that, I'll get off my soapbox. Is there any other questions before we move on to the other report or comments? Okay, thank you, Ms. Stone, and I'll turn it over to Elena Rutter to talk about the Ethics Special Committee. And she made me promise I would say the report is draft, and it is not final, so it is a draft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As he said, it is a draft, so there is a draft stamp on your copy. We sent it to the committee for review, and depending on what the committee review process is like, it will be approved as of next week. So for 2 days during the interim, the Special Committee on Governmental Ethics Reform Campaign Finance Law met to evaluate current laws and regulations concerning the Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission and campaign finance, and then make recommendations to the legislature. The committee made 4 formal recommendations. The first 3 are aimed at addressing concerns that define terms in the Campaign Finance Act are too vague. And those terms are coordination, giving in the name of another, or contribution in the name of another, and political committee or PAC. And the other recommendation was to address concerns that contribution limits are too low, and so the recommendation would be to consider increasing contribution limits. On the first day of the committee, we kicked off the day with a presentation by Professor McGinnis from Northwestern University Pritzker School of Law, and he gave us an overview of arguments both for and against regulating speech. He said those in favor of regulation argue that regulation ensures everyone has an equal opportunity to speak, and they also argue that money is not speech. And then on the other hand, money is speech, and the First Amendment is not an equality right, but a right of individuals to express and support their beliefs. And he also provided an overview of a few U.S. Supreme Court cases. One he highlighted was Buckley v. Vallejo, and that case highlighted that both independent expenditures and campaign contributions are protected by free speech and in different ways. He said independent expenditures are monies spent by a candidate, and they can't be limited because they're free speech. And then campaign contributions are money given directly to a campaign, and those can be reasonably restricted to reduce or to not give the appearance of quid pro quo and increase confidence in elections. Professor McGinnis also provided 4 principles that he thinks are important for state legislatures to observe. He said that independent expenditures should be unlimited. Restrictions on campaign contributions should be reasonable and take into account inflation and changing times. There should be a clear distinction between expenditures and coordinated expenditures, and laws should not be vague. To conclude, Professor McGinnis provided 2 policy recommendations. The first was to structure laws, such as the definitions of independent expenditure and coordination, to be in tune with federal rules. He clarified that you don't need to copy exactly what the federal rules are, but to have something in the spirit of those rules, because they have been litigated many times and are more clear than if you start fresh, then work through like processes of litigation. And his second recommendation is to increase contribution limits, and he stated that an increase in contribution limits could help avoid polarization. Next, we had some comments from the Office of the Governor. The Chief of Staff for Governor Kelly addressed the committee and stated that the Office of the Governor supports promoting transparency and placing limits on campaign contributions, and also stated the office would be open to increasing contribution limits, making contribution limits for political parties unlimited, and putting protections in place so political parties don't influence primary races. After comments from the governor, there were multiple conferees who gave public testimony, public comment. In total, there were 10, and they ranged from professors to attorneys who have represented people during investigations from the Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission and the interim dean at Washburn University, and some representatives of other organizations, one of which was the Campaign Legal Center. And there were also 2 members of ethics commissions from other states who provided written testimony. And these conferees generally talked about disclosure requirements, transparency, clearly defining terms in the Campaign Finance Act, contribution limits, investigations, and then some, also contributions and giving in the name of another. Then the executive director, Mark Scoglin, for the Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission, provided some information to the special committee. He addressed how individuals have their name cleared during an investigation. He also explained that it is important to have legislation that provides clear guidance and bright line rules to help encourage support and public trust in political processes. He provided some information about the structure of the Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission. So things like who appoints members and political party makeup for the commission, and restrictions on certain political activity while serving as a member of the commission. The executive director addressed quid pro quo corruption and how secret donations and large donations are often seen as being given in the expectation of particular results. He shared research from 23 states indicating that disclosure does not chill speech. And he also shared an example from Seattle, Washington, where they used democracy vouchers and how people were more likely to fill out a democracy voucher than they were to vote, even though it was a public record. And then the executive director concluded by sharing the Governmental Ethics Commission's legislative recommendations for the 2024 legislative session. And those are listed in the report, and I don't want to steal his thunder, so I will let him do that at a different date if the committee does so. And then on the second day, we started with a presentation from the Institute for Free Speech. The chairman and the president of the Institute for Free Speech gave a joint presentation, and they talked about Kansas scores on their free speech index and how certain changes could affect such score. They discussed how simplicity should be a guiding principle and simple disclosures help with compliance. The chairman also stated that contribution limits add complexity and overregulation hinders people from getting involved. They discussed how major organizations may choose to support a candidate, but that doesn't mean that all members of that organization also support the candidate. So they stated that there's no need to disclose every individual's name who's a part of that organization on campaign finance reports, just the organization. And then they also provided some observations and recommendations to the committee based on their review of Kansas law and practices. So one thing that they stated was the PAC threshold is unconstitutional because there's no dollar amount for the registration requirement. They stated the major purpose test for PACs is unconstitutional, and that the definition of a PAC is crucial to good campaign finance law. The current disclosure requirements for independent expenditures by non-PACs is unclear in current law. Disclosure thresholds should be increased, contribution limits should be increased and indexed for inflation. Regulators should not use enforcement to provide clarity on vague law. The legislature should consider including a presumption of free speech in the law, and they provided an example. They stated that the coordination law is unclear. They suggested a repeal of grassroots advocacy reporting and to avoid regulating grassroots advocacy. To consider an internet exception because the internet is unique and it's a means to communicate with a large audience. And finally, a way to help political parties would be not limiting individual contributions to political parties. And later that day, myself and other analysts at Legislative Research provided an overview of ethics commissions in all 50 states and the history of the Kansas Governmental Ethics Report, including the name change over the years. We also provided some information about campaign contributions, specifically bill history in Kansas, when there have been bills addressing contribution limits and when they have been changed, and then what the current contribution limits are in other states for individuals. Jason Long, one of the revisers, provided an overview of the bill enacted during the 2023 session, House Sub for SB 208, which covered the Governmental Ethics Commission changes and had a 5-year statute of limitations for actions brought by the Ethics Commission, and then some other, there were numerous provisions in that, and Jason went over all of those. And then we also, at KLRD, provided an overview of express advocacy, corrupt political advertising, and bills from last session on those topics, and then the executive director for the Ethics Commission also weighed in on that topic. Committee had discussion and then decided on the 4 recommendations at the beginning to define the term coordination, clarify the definition for giving in the name of another or contribution in the name of another, and clarifying the definition of PAC, and also to consider increasing contribution limits. And that's everything.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Ms. Rutter or any observations or anybody who is in the committee want to add? Representative Dodson, thank God.
Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I've got a bit of a hobby horse on this. It kind of starts with Citizens United, as some of you may remember. And the example I would use is if you're in a small town and you're running for, let's say, city commissioner or school board, and you have what I would consider a reasonable amount of money for a campaign, let's say it's $4,000, and the way the money works, you know, money talks. And so if someone infuses your opponent's campaign with, let's say, $20,000, and you start out on an equal footing of the people who might know you across your city, you're going to lose. So the message becomes less clear because it's overcome with the mass that money can buy. So that's just an observation. So it has not anything to do with ethics, but it has to do with the control of monies that flow into campaigns. And under Citizens United, they actually gave the Congress an out, but they have done nothing yet to define kind of the terms under which this case was decided. So just an observation, and I appreciate it, Mr. Chair.
Representative Berquist.
Just a simple statement. I want to say how much I appreciate the comprehensive notes you took. That was incredible.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I wasn't actually able to make that meeting, and these really are very, very helpful notes. I do wonder, on page 7, and I presume that probably the person's here, a senior research analyst from KLRD provided research detailing the campaign contribution limits in each state. Is there like a copy of that somewhere? I mean, that was very interesting that five states permit unlimited contributions, and that the Kansas limits haven't been changed since 1981. If there's a way to have that emailed or be made aware of it, I think it's helpful, or at the very least interesting information.
Yes, we have those documents still. I sent them to our lovely committee assistant, and she uploaded them to the legislature's website. It's a little slow, so I'm not sure if they're there, but we can also send that out.
Cheryl, could you send that specific one out to the committee, just so people don't have to hunt and click? Any other questions or comments? Yeah, I just point out that these are actually recommendations. The committee, we kind of took a consensus, and everybody agreed that those recommendations were things that, across the aisle we could all kind of get behind as things that we needed to take up and look at, not necessarily pass. The devil's always in the details, but we needed to take up and look at here in this committee and over in the Senate this year. So. I guess I'll just leave it at that until the report is finalized. Because we're talking about the topic, I wanted to offer the opportunity to the executive director if he did want to make any observations or anything else on the ethics committee. Please feel free to come to the podium.
Sure, Mark Scoglin, the Executive Director of the Ethics Commission. Good seeing you all. I don't know that I have a lot of comments, but I will just note I'm here if there's any. I know we're going to talk about all of this, I'm sure, quite a bit this year. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. I think that there's a lot of room for some really good law, and I'm looking forward to working with you all on that.
All right. Any final questions or concerns? Because we are at the end of the agenda, and I trained a standard, not to time here, so I don't feel the need to keep us later if we don't have anything. That almost certainly silenced any lingering questions, but I'll open the floor for the good of the order if there's any questions or outstanding issues. Okay, so please keep an eye on your email. We may have a change to the agenda. If I can't get all the vendors here next week, it may bump, but we'll definitely be meeting on Tuesday and Thursday because the vice chair just filled our bucket with things to do. So, and we're only a 2-day-a-week committee, so we got a lot of work to do, and we've already lost a day. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. We're adjourned.